Khalid Al-Fahim leaned forward in his leather booth, the corner of his mouth twitching with a smirk that never reached his eyes. "Say that again, kid. You speak how many languages?" The boy standing 5 feet away didn't flinch. His voice was calm, steady and shaken. 9, sir." The billionaire CEO blinked once, then chuckled. It wasn't laughter that warmed the room. It was the kind that curdled into a scoff. The kind that always comes right before someone says something they'll regret. 9, and I suppose you picked those up on the streets of the Bronx, between shifts washing dishes? Around them, the Manhattan restaurant swelled with clinking wine glasses and plates priced higher than a week of his mother's wages. But in that moment, the noise seemed to collapse into silence. Tension sliced the air sharper than broken glass. The boy's name was Jaden Brooks. 14 years old, athletic build, sharp eyes. Son of Monica Brooks, the overnight waitress who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. What no one knew, not even Monica, was that her son had spent the last 3 years shaping silence into strategy, turning overlooked hours into mastery. And tonight was no accident. This wasn't a story of pity. It wasn't about struggle. This was about calculation, power, a reclaiming of dignity where it had been trampled. Jaden hadn't come for sympathy, and he certainly hadn't come to impress. He came to expose. And before the night was over, the man who laughed at him would learn a lesson. The sharpest minds don't always come from Ivy League classrooms. Sometimes they come from public libraries, from resilience, from mothers who refuse to break. If you're still reading, you're exactly who this story is for. So lean in, because what happens next is the kind of story that makes you question everything you believe about talent, race, and power. This isn't just any story. This is Jaden's story. And it begins with a lie the world loves to tell until someone like him shatters it. Jaden didn't blink. His shoulders squared, chin lifted not in defiance, but in quiet self-respect. He stood like someone who knew his worth, even if no one else in that room did. 9 languages, he repeated without hesitation. English, Spanish, French, Arabic, Russian, Mandarin, Portuguese, Japanese, Korean. The air shifted. Behind the bar, a bartender paused mid-pour. A busboy slowed with a plate in hand. Monica, frozen in the kitchen doorway, felt the blood drain from her face. She had begged Jaden to stay quiet, to avoid attention, to never cross a man like Khalid Al-Fahim. But Jaden had already decided the time was now. Khalid laughed louder this time, the laugh of a man too used to being right, too comfortable with never being questioned by anyone without a tailored suit or a 6-figure degree. Japanese, Mandarin, what's next? Martian, you pick those up watching anime and kung fu reruns? The room tilted. The crowd shifted from amusement to discomfort. But Jaden remained rooted. Would you like a demonstration? His voice didn't waver. Khalid leaned back, more curious now than annoyed. All right, let's see the show. Jaden turned to the bar and spoke softly in Japanese. Excuse me, may I have a glass of water? Please. Hiroshi, the bartender from Kyoto, who rarely spoke unless spoken to, froze. Then recognition sparked in his eyes. He smiled and answered back in fluent Japanese. "Perfect pitch. You sound like you're from Osaka." The words landed like a gut punch. Colin's smirk faltered for the first time. Jaden turned back to him. "That's one." Colin's jaw tightened. "Parlor tricks," he muttered. "A phrase or two doesn't make you fluent." Asterisk, asterisk, Jaden said nothing. He let the silence do the work. And that silence was not empty, it was filled with years of being underestimated. It was the start of a storm Hull had never saw coming. Monica Brooks hadn't planned for her life to look like this. Once upon a time, she sat in the back row of her college linguistics class, notebook in hand. Her dreams sharper than her accent. She wanted to teach languages, maybe literature, maybe even travel the world. But one positive pregnancy test at 19 changed everything. Her parents were supportive in the way some families are, love hidden in silence, judgment tucked into glances. They helped where they could, but reality was merciless. By the end of her second semester, Monica dropped out. 6 weeks later, she picked up her first waitress job. The dream of teaching folded like a page in an unfinished book. Then came Jaden too. Months premature, barely for pounds. She remembered holding him under the harsh glow of hospital lights, wrapped in paper-thin cloth, eyes wide open and locked onto the world. A nurse had whispered, "That baby watches everything." And he did. As a toddler, Jaden was different. He listened more than he spoke, mimicked accents from cartoons with eerie accuracy, and memorized dialogues from the foreign films Monica borrowed from the library. At 7, he wasn't asking for video games, he was asking for language apps. And now, at 14, he stood in the center of a Manhattan restaurant, 9 languages at his command, daring a billionaire to doubt him again. This was no accident. This was destiny sharpened in silence. And the storm had only just begun. Monica once thought Jaden's obsession with languages was just a phase, something he'd outgrow. But it wasn't. Their lives were lived inside a cramped Bronx studio apartment, where the walls were thin, the heat worked only half the time, and every creak of the floor reminded her of how little they had. Monica worked nights at the diner, weekends at the downtown hotel, her life consumed by shifts that stole her sleep, but kept the lights on. Jaden filled his afternoons at the public library a few blocks away, devouring the language learning section like a soldier stockpiling weapons. What Monica never realized was that her son was quietly building something far greater than a hobby. He was constructing a fortress of knowledge, of confidence, of strategy. He never asked for tutors, new clothes, or money he knew she didn't have. He didn't need to. She had already given everything: her youth, her health, her nights of rest, and somehow that had been enough. Jaden never blamed her for what they lacked. Instead, he watched her. He studied the way she endured 12-hour shifts on her feet. Her hands blistered, her back bent, but her dignity unshaken. Every time someone dismissed her as just a waitress, he silently added another reason to his list, a list of things he would one day prove. And tonight was the beginning. Khaled's fingers tapped the edge of the marble table, the rhythm sharp and impatient. He wasn't laughing anymore. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. Amusement had evaporated, replaced by a heavy tension. that clung to every breath like the thick humidity before a storm. Jaden hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't taken a single step forward, yet somehow he had seized control of the room with nothing but his presence. "Russian," Khalid said suddenly, his tone laced with challenge. "You claim you speak Russian." Jaden nodded once. "Fine. Then speak to Mr. Valov at table 6. Khalid commanded, pointing toward an older man sipping his black coffee in the corner. "He's from Moscow. Let's see what your precious public library taught you." Without hesitation, Jaden walked to the table. He introduced himself in Russian fluid, confident, precise. His words flowed with natural cadence as he asked about Mr. Valov's day, complimented his accent, and casually inquired whether he preferred Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. Valov's eyes widened with every phrase. By the time he responded, laughter spilled from his chest. In Russian, he turned toward Khalid and announced, "He is good, very good. He speaks as though he's lived in St. Petersburg." The approval landed like a stone in water rippling through the restaurant. Jaden offered the man a polite smile and returned to the center of the room. Now every pair of eyes was on him. Some held disbelief. Others, all from the kitchen doorway. Monica stood frozen. Her throat tightened, her eyes brimming. Just last night, she had scrubbed that same floor beneath her feet, body aching from back-to-back shifts, and now her son stood in the same room, speaking languages she couldn't even identify, commanding the attention of men with power and money as though it were a chess game. And Jaden already knew the final move. Asterisk, asterisk. Reaching into his worn backpack, faded and frayed from years of use, Jaden pulled out 3 neatly folded documents. He placed them carefully on the table in front of Khalid. "These," Jaden said, his voice calm but unwavering, "are my language proficiency certifications from the city's gifted youth program." Khalid's eyes narrowed as he snatched them up, scanning for flaws. Russian, Japanese, Arabic, certified at advanced levels, Jaden continued. "All earned in the last 2 years. You expect me to believe these aren't forged?" Khalid's words carried more venom than doubt. "You're welcome to. Call the program director," Jaden replied without blinking. "I memorized the extension. Or, if you'd prefer, I can call for you in Arabic." A ripple of laughter drifted from the bar. Not mocking, but impressed. Jaden wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was dismantling an entire narrative. In front of people who had doubted him at first glance. And he was just getting started. Khalid Al-Fahim leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing into slits. The smirk was gone, replaced by calculation. He wasn't laughing, but he wasn't ready to yield either. Men like him didn't rise to wealth by giving ground easily. Billionaires weren't just rich, they stayed rich because they could smell. When something didn't add up, and a teenager fluent in 9 languages, that didn't add up. "Let's make this interesting," Khalid muttered. He pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found a recent email thread. He turned the screen toward Jaden. "This is a bilingual contract, draft Arabic and English. It's a preliminary agreement for our Dubai partnership. Go ahead. Tell me, what's wrong with it?" Jaden accepted the phone with steady hands. He scanned the screen for less than a minute, then looked up. In section 5, you used the word mubisher, he said plainly. But in this context, the correct word is fori. Mubisher means broadcast or direct. Fori conveys urgency, immediate action. In a business contract, that difference changes everything. Khalid's jaw stiffened. Jaden's voice didn't waver. You also used Marek to describe delivery expectations. That word means adolescent. I believe you meant mirage, which refers to anticipated timing. The room froze. Silence pressed down over the tables. The assistant manager coughed awkwardly. Behind the counter, the kitchen staff exchanged wide-eyed glances. Monica covered her mouth, her chest tightening with disbelief. Her son had just exposed to critical errors in a multi-million-dollar contract in under a minute. Khalid snatched the phone back, scanning the text with rapid eyes. Sure enough, the boy was right. What else? Khalid asked through gritted teeth. Jaden reached into his backpack again, calm and deliberate, and pulled out a compact tablet. The sleek black screen lit up as he tapped it to life. Within seconds, he had opened a document, his own side-by-side translation of Khalid's contract, color-coded line by line for clarity. He rotated the screen toward the billionaire. I revised the full draft, Jaden said evenly. I left comments in both English and Arabic for your legal team. If you'd like, I can send a clean version tonight. Khalid's voice dropped, caught between disbelief and irritation. You rewrote my contract. Asterisk, asterisk, I improved it. Jaden corrected, turned sharp as steel, and probably saved your Dubai deal. For the first time all evening, Khalid had no quick reply. His eyes scanned the screen in silence, the glow of the tablet reflecting off his expression. This wasn't a child showing off vocabulary tricks. This was corporate-level linguistic strategy, the kind that only came with real-world precision. Jaden wasn't just speaking languages, he was dissecting them, catching nuance, spotting landmines hidden in syntax. It dawned on Khalid with a weight that unsettled him. This boy was lethal with words. Lethal in a way no Ivy League resume could match. And this wasn't about a kid trying to impress a billionaire, it was about preparation colliding with prejudice, brilliance born not from privilege but from purpose. Jaden Brooks wasn't playing games. He was making moves. The room had gone silent again, but this silence was different. Not the hush of doubt or discomfort. This was the suspended breath everyone holds right before an earthquake hits. Khalid Al-Fahim sat stiffly, jaw clenched tight, his fingers hovering over the tablet as though he could erase the evidence with a swipe. He wanted to delete it, erase the moment, bury it. But he couldn't, because the truth was staring back at him in black and white. Then Jaden did something no one expected. He reached into his backpack once more. This time, he pulled out a small, unremarkable black audio recorder, plain, compact, almost forgettable except for the weight it carried. The moment Jaden set it on the table, Khalid's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What is that?" Khalid asked, his voice sharper now. Jaden pressed play. At first, the recording was muffled background clatter, dishes clinking, faint elevator music. Then a voice emerged, clear, distinct, unmistakable. Khalid's voice. "They're all the same," it said. "Cold, dismissive. These black Americans lazy, unqualified, always playing the victim card. A sharp gasp broke the room. Not from Monica, not from the staff. From a guest at a nearby table, an older woman who had overheard the slur once before. Jaden let the tape roll. "That's why we keep them in server roles." Khaled's voice continued. "Diversity looks good on paper, but we don't need them in management." Khaled lunged forward and slammed the stop button, his face drained of color. Monica staggered back a step, her hand trembling against her lips. "Where did you get that?" Khaled demanded, his voice cracking at the edges. Asterisk in the elevator. Jaden replied calmly. "Last week, you were speaking to your regional manager. I was standing behind the cart. You never saw me. You can't use that. That's illegal." Khaled snapped. "New York is a one-party consent state," Jaden said, steady as stone. "Only one person needs to know the conversation is being recorded, and that person was me." Khaled's mouth opened, but no words came. Around him, silence closed in like a trap. Everyone had heard it: the staff, the customers, the peers who once applauded his polished speeches about diversity and equality at investor conferences. Now, stripped bare. Khaled Al-Fahim wasn't the visionary CEO. He was a fraud caught in his own voice, and the worst part, it wasn't emotion or opinion that cornered him. It was evidence. The exposure burned. It stuck. It spread like fire in dry grass. Jaden didn't gloat. He didn't flinch. He stood calmly in the blaze he himself had lit, because this was never about revenge. It was about truth, and the truth was undeniable. For years, Khaled had built his empire from silence, knowing when to speak, when to smile, and, more importantly, when to make others disappear. But in this moment, silence betrayed him. He stared at the boy across the table, eyes wide, breath shallow. "You don't know what you've just done," Khaled finally said, his voice low, still trying to grip control. Jaden didn't blink. "No, sir. I know exactly what I've done." Monica's heart twisted. She looked at her son with fear and disbelief. She knew exactly how dangerous men like Khaled were: their money, their reach, their lawyers, their silence. She leaned in, whispering urgently, "Baby, maybe we should go." But Jaden shook his head, his voice clear enough for the entire room to hear. "We're not running." Khaled straightened, his expression hardening again. "You want to threaten me, a child, with a toy recorder?" "This isn't a threat," Jaden replied, calm as ice. "It's leverage, and a chance for you to make a different choice than the one you made in that elevator." Khaled's eyes narrowed into slits. "You don't understand how the world works." No, Jaden said, unwavering. "I understand exactly how it works, which is why I recorded the conversation, which is why I emailed a copy to my attorney, and why I stored another in cloud backup." A murmur rippled through the staff. The weight of those words hit hard. "You think I can't crush this?" Khaled's voice rose, desperate now. "I think you could try," Jaden answered, still steady. "But that recording, along with your contract errors, could go viral before lunch tomorrow. The Labor Department, the press, civil rights attorneys. You wouldn't just lose your image. you'd lose your entire board. The room felt smaller now, as though the walls had closed in on Hullid himself. He leaned forward, his eyes burning cold. "What do you want?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. Jaden didn't smile. He wasn't here for games. His voice was quiet, controlled, deliberate. "I want change," he said. Then he paused. "But we'll get to that." Jaden tapped the recorder gently with his fingertip. "First, I want you to understand what this is," he said, voice even, calm, deliberate. "This isn't revenge. It's accountability. You built your company on the backs of people like my mother, then mocked them for not being able to climb out. But now you have a choice." He paused, letting the words settle. "You can keep pretending you're untouchable, or you can prove you're capable of learning." And in that moment, Hullid saw it clearly. This wasn't a boy standing in front of him. This was something else entirely. Justice disguised as a black kid from the Bronx, armed not with wealth or privilege, but with facts, law, and truth. Hullid stared at Jaden like he was staring at a mirror, one that reflected back everything he had tried to bury about himself. Not a boy, not an employee, not even a threat. Something unclassifiable, something undeniable. Jaden stepped forward, his tone steady, eyes locked on Khalid's. "I'm not here to destroy your company. That would be easy. One email, one headline, and everything you've built starts to collapse." Khalid's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. His silence spoke louder than denial. "But that's not what I want," Jaden continued. "I want justice." From his backpack, Jaden pulled one last item, a neatly folded document. His movements were deliberate, confident. Monica's voice trembled from the kitchen entrance. "Jaden." "What is that?" "My proposal," Jaden said, handing it to Hullid without hesitation. The billionaire unfolded the paper, scanning the contents. His brow furrowed, his silence heavy. "I'm not asking for money," Jaden said firmly. "Not for myself. I'm asking for opportunity for people like my mother, for kids like me." Khalid's eyes flicked over the list, but Jaden wasn't done. He began to explain. His delivery sharp, precise, like a young attorney presenting his case before a jury. "First," Jaden said, "I want my mother promoted to general manager of this flagship restaurant. Not because she's my mom, but because she's earned it. 5 years of loyalty, not one complaint. The staff love her. She already runs this place without the title." Hullid said nothing, but the shift in his jawline betrayed the blow. "Second," Jaden continued, "I want a scholarship program, the Monica Brooks Future Minds Initiative, funded by your company, designed to help Black and Latino youth pursue education in languages and business. Kids like me, kids you'd normally overlook." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Monica's knees nearly gave out. "And third," Jaden said, his voice lowering but gaining force, "I want a position, not as a token hire, but as a junior language consultant. Part-time, remote, clear deliverables. I'll prove my worth." For the first time, Hullid spoke. His voice was dry, almost cracked. "You're 14, and I've already saved you from a multi-million-dollar PR scandal. Jaden shot back without missing a beat. And your Dubai deal? The restaurant was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights overhead. Khalid's eyes returned to the paper. It wasn't emotional, it was precise, professional. A proposal drafted by someone who had done the research, who had studied his enemy and turned the battlefield into opportunity. This isn't a threat, Mr. Al-Fahim, Jaden said, his tone controlled. It's a solution, and it's your chance to do something different for once. For the first time in years, Khalid found himself cornered by something he couldn't buy, bully, or bury. He wasn't facing a competitor or a regulator. He was facing a boy with nothing but truth, and truth was unshakable. The billionaire sat in silence, but it wasn't anger this time. It was the silence of being seen too clearly. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Jaden didn't press. He let the moment breathe. He let the weight of history and accountability press down on Khalid's chest the way it had weighed on his mother's shoulders for years. Finally, Khalid broke the silence. "You think you know me?" he asked, voice low, defensive. "I know enough," Jaden said. His tone was calm, but there was steel beneath it, enough to understand that somewhere along the way you forgot. Khalid's head snapped up, his eyes sharp. Asterisk, asterisk, you were 16 when you came to America, Jaden said, his voice softening, not mocking, not accusing, just real. A refugee from Syria. Your father worked nights at a gas station. Your mother cleaned houses. You barely spoke English. You failed your first placement test. Khalid's face drained of color. But you had help, Jaden continued, his voice steady. A librarian who taught you how to pronounce your R's. A teacher who stayed after school. A neighbor who gave you an old laptop. You had people who saw your potential before you had power. Jaden lowered his gaze, then lifted it again, eyes burning. And now, you're the man who tells black kids their dreams are delusions. The man who hires women like my mom to serve but never to lead. Monica's breath caught in her throat. She had never heard her son speak like this, not as a boy, but as a voice carrying the weight of history. Khalid rubbed his temples, his composure cracking. I worked hard. I earned everything I have. I know you did, Jaden replied. But somewhere along the way, you stopped making room for anyone else. You climbed the ladder and pulled it up behind you. The restaurant was so still it felt like time itself was listening. You didn't start this journey as a villain, Jaden said, his voice cutting through the silence. But that recording, your hiring practices, the way you looked at me like I was nothing, that's not the man who came here at 16. That's not the boy who was afraid of being overlooked. And in that instant, Khalid didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like that boy again, lost, foreign, desperate for someone to see him. Jaden stepped back, his voice final, unshakable. You can keep being the man they fear, or you can become the man you once needed. The paper trembled in Khalid's hands, and suddenly, it wasn't just a contract anymore. It was a second chance. The pen hovered over the signature line longer than anyone expected. Khalid Al-Fahim, billionaire CEO, once proud of laughing at the son of a waitress, now sat in his own restaurant surrounded not by advisors, not by lawyers, but by truth. And the truth had a face. A young, determined black face named Jaden Brooks. At last, Hullid signed. It was not the signature of a man cornered. It was the signature of a man who had finally been reminded who he once was. Asterisk, it was the signature of a man who had been forced to confront his own reflection and didn't like what stared back. Slowly, Hullid rose from his chair and, for the first time since Monica had walked into his restaurant years ago, he truly looked at her, not as the night shift waitress, not as the single mother balancing bills and exhaustion. He saw her as a human being who had sacrificed everything to raise a son with brilliance. That could not be contained. His voice dropped, almost breaking under its own weight. "You deserve more," he said quietly. Monica swallowed hard, nodding as tears threatened to spill. It wasn't just the promotion, it was recognition. After years of being invisible behind trays and aprons, someone finally acknowledged the truth she had always known. She was more. Jaden stepped forward, gaze unflinching. "You won't regret this," he said firmly. Hullid exhaled, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I already don't." 2 weeks later, Monica walked through the doors of the flagship restaurant transformed. A navy blue blazer rested on her shoulders. Her name etched in gold on a small pin, General Manager. Her stride was steady, her presence undeniable. Staff who had once overlooked her now rose when she entered, not out of obligation, but out of earned respect. The silence she had once endured was gone, replaced by authority, recognition, and dignity. Meanwhile, Jaden began consulting remotely for Alfahim Global. His input sharpened negotiations, and one of his revisions broke open a stalled partnership, with a Japanese firm closing a deal worth over $60 million. Executives began whispering his name across boardrooms, the prodigy from the Bronx. But Jaden never let the praise consume him. This was never about titles or prestige. It was about rewriting the rules. 6 months later, the Monica Brooks Future Minds Initiative welcomed its first class, 20 students from overlooked neighborhoods. Each granted full scholarships to study language, business, and global communication. Monica herself stood on stage to deliver the keynote address. Her son introduced her with pride glowing in his eyes and in the audience. Hullid sat not as a man defending his empire, but as a man learning to share it. Redemption wasn't measured in public apologies. It lived in what you built afterward. And in that room, for the first time in a long time, everyone believed. This was only the beginning. The Manhattan skyline remained unchanged, but inside Khalid's world, everything had shifted. The corner office that once echoed with arrogance now held something different. On the wall were framed press clippings, and investor awards once hung. A new display took center stage, 50 certificates, each bearing the name of a student accepted into the Future Minds Initiative. Every week, Hullid stood before that wall, reminding himself why he had signed Jaden's contract. Across town, Monica entered her restaurant with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer lived in the shadows. Her polished blazer fit perfectly. Her staff greeted her by name, with warmth and respect. no longer invisible. She stood as a woman who had survived, endured, and risen. And Jaden, at just 15, was sitting in a live negotiation with Alfahim Global's Tokyo division, translating in real time between Japanese executives and Khaled's legal team. He caught idiomatic nuances, clarified complex clauses, and bridged worlds with ease. He didn't dominate conversations, he flowed through them seamless, precise, brilliant. Since joining, his work had already contributed to over $200 million in new business. But Jaden never bragged. Numbers weren't his proof, results were. On his breaks, he logged into virtual tutoring sessions with Future Minds students, mentoring kids who reminded him of himself, kids from overlooked neighborhoods, hungry for a chance. One afternoon, while reviewing a multilingual press release, Khaled glanced at Jaden and asked quietly, "You ever think about what you've done?" Jaden looked up with a half smile. "Which part?" "All of it," Khaled said, gesturing around the office, "the deals, the programs, the change." Jaden's answer was calm, almost matter-of-fact. "I think about what we're still doing." Khaled nodded slowly. "That's a better answer." And in that moment, it didn't feel like a billionaire speaking to a boy. It felt like two men different in race, age, and upbringing walking the same road. Not because one held power over the other, but because both had realized the same truth. A better world doesn't just appear. It has to be built, piece by piece, intentionally. Jaden once said something that lingered with everyone who heard it. The impossible is just the possible that hasn't happened yet. It wasn't a slogan, it was a philosophy, one that had carried him from a Bronx library corner to the boardroom of a global empire. And beneath all the headlines and applause lived a simple truth. Proof changes everything, not loud arguments, not emotion alone, not desperate pleas to be seen. Proof, when the world doubts your value. Show them, not with rage, but with preparation, not with noise, but with results. Because proof makes even the most unwilling listen. Jaden hadn't won by shouting. He hadn't fought fire with fire. He studied. He practiced. He stayed ready for a moment no one thought he deserved. And when that moment came, he didn't just defend his worth, he redefined it. For his mother, for his community, for every young person told to stay in their place. Monica once told him after a long shift, "They can take a lot away from you, baby, but they can't take away what you've earned." She was right. Now her name was etched into scholarship plaques and echoed in the lives of students she had never met, but who would grow up knowing their worth didn't begin at zero. So if you're listening to this story and wondering where you stand, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or passed over, remember this. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't need permission to prove them wrong. You need the courage to prepare, the patience to outlast the noise, and the discipline to let evidence speak. Because opinions will always echo, but evidence silences the room. And sometimes, the most powerful story you'll ever tell isn't the one you speak. It's the one you show. If this story moved you, even just a little, pass it on. Someone else out there might be waiting for proof that they're not alone. And if you believe in stories like this, real ones about power, redemption, and rising against the odds, subscribe to this channel. because this is only one chapter, and the best ones, they haven't been written yet.